You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Welcome to Unbiased Science,
where we bring scientific method to the madness.
We're hosts Dr. Jess Dyer
and Dr. Sarah Scheinman.
And today I'm having a little bit of a freak out, total fangirl moment. We have the Dr. Paul Offit on the podcast. Cannot believe I'm saying these words to talk about a variety of things. We'll talk COVID vaccines, other topics du jour. Dr. Offit, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for asking me. My pleasure.
Oh my goodness. I had my full freak out offline, so I'll spare everyone. I'm sure everyone knows Dr. Offit, but I'm going to read this brief bio. So Dr. Paul Offit is a pediatrician specializing in infectious diseases and an expert on vaccines, immunology, and virology. He is the co-director of a rotavirus vaccine that has been credited with saving hundreds of lives every day. Dr. Offit is the Maurice R. Hilleman Professor of Vaccinology, Professor of Pediatrics at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania, and Director of the Vaccine Education Center at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, CHOP. He's also a member of the FDA's Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee. Previously, he was a member of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's, CDC's, Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. He is a board member of Vaccinate Your Family, the Franklin Institute, and Autism Science Foundation.
That was the tip of the iceberg, by the way, you guys. Like that's a very truncated version of this man's bio. Like his accomplishments are way too many to even. We'd spend the whole hour.
Yeah, we don't want to make him blush, but I'm going to tell you, I have like tears welling up. Like this is a moment. This is a moment for Unbiased. But anyway,
this is definitely an episode to watch on YouTube, just so you can see Jess's face.
Yeah, it's just awkwardly beaming here. Okay. So let's get into it. So I guess one of the questions that we get a lot is, when did the pandemic end, or did it end? So I'm wondering, Dr. Offit, if maybe that's a good starting point. Like, can you take us through are there certain things that happen that make us shift away from pandemic to something being endemic? Can we talk about that a little bit?
Right. So I guess the definition of a pandemic is something that changes the way you live, work, or play. And certainly, for example, in 2020, 2021, when we had shuttered schools and restricted travel and closed businesses and masked and social distanced and tested and isolated and quarantined, that changed the way we lived, worked, and played. And then it's more of a gradual thing. As people sort of got back to their normal routine at work, people became more comfortable, say, going to sporting events indoors, without wearing a mask. I wouldn't say there was one moment. I would just say sort of after 2021, moving to 2022 and 2023, that's when it settled into an endemic situation, because this virus, SARS-CoV-2, is certainly going to be with us for decades, if not centuries.
Now, how would you define endemic then, just to kind of differentiate the two?
Right. So it's a virus that continues to circulate.
Okay.
I mean, influenza, respiratory syncytial virus, the 4 strains of human coronavirus, parainfluenza virus, rotavirus. I mean, those are endemic viruses.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so you recently wrote a book. You've written several books, but I believe your latest book is Tell Me When It's Over, right? And so this offers a candid behind-the-scenes look at what happened during the pandemic. And interestingly, he walks us through the confusion around public health messaging, and I really want to talk about this, the politicization of science, and the challenges of communicating risk in real time. Now, what you did in this book was incredible, but it's full of myth busting. So why do you think that COVID, more than almost any other public health crisis, became such a breeding ground for misinformation?
So, I think here was a virus that entered this country probably around January of 2020 and started to kill people. And we didn't have anything. You didn't have antivirals till October. You didn't have monoclonals till November. You didn't have vaccines till December. To prevent a virus which had novel biological and clinical characteristics, which was spread asymptomatically. So anybody you came in contact with, even though they looked fine, could transfer to you a virus that could kill you. And so we just did everything we could to limit human-to-human contact. And as I said, sort of, shuttered school, closed businesses, restricted travel. And that was seen as, I think by some, as massive government overreach. I think we kind of leaned into this libertarian left hook. I think the same thing happened the following year when we had a vaccine by December of 2020, but really was sort of released. And then you sort of from January 2021 up through July, we vaccinated 70% of the population, which is remarkable considering you didn't have an infrastructure for mass vaccinating adults. But I think what happened was we knew, for example, in 2021, that you were 12 times less likely to be hospitalized or die if you were vaccinated than if you weren't vaccinated. In 2022, it was about 6 times difference. But so I think because we were so desperate to get people vaccinated, I think we oversold it a little bit. Oversold it in the sense that we should have made it very clear from December of 2020, when protective efficacy was 90 from those first 2 studies, right? The Pfizer study that was presented to us, our vaccine advisory committee at the FDA, in December 10th of 2020, and then Moderna a week later. Those were 40,000 and 30,000 person studies, and protective efficacy was like 95% against all manner of symptomatic illness, mild, moderate, or severe. There's no way that was going to hold up for mild and moderate disease, which is based on antibodies in circulation, which fade. And that's what happened. 6 months later, the protective efficacy against mild to moderate disease was 50%, not 95%. And we should have made that clear very early on, that the purpose of this vaccine is to keep you out of the hospital, keep you out of the care unit, keep you out of the ward. Because otherwise, what happens, we mandated the vaccine. People would get fired from work if they didn't get the vaccine, or some would. And, people would still get a moderate infection, a couple of days of fever, home, coughing, and they're thinking, they mandated this vaccine, I'm still sick. They lied to me. And I think we should have had a much more realistic expectation of what you could expect from this vaccine. And I think that was one of our mistakes, because we were so desperate to have people get vaccinated. The other thing was sort of contagiousness. Obviously, I think if you get the vaccine, you will shed less virus for less long. But that doesn't mean that you can't shed virus and that you're not going to be contagious, because you still could be contagious.
I think that's a really important distinction. And definitely, I'm just thinking back to I was still in graduate school during the pandemic, and they would have not allowed me to continue my studies if I didn't get vaccinated. This was something that everyone everywhere needed to do to get done in order to sort of continue with life as they know it. Like you were saying, working, playing, functioning in real time.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of the language around it was unfortunate. Always easy in retrospect, by the way.
Sure.
I mean, I think there was nothing nefarious going on, I think, behind the scenes, as many would have us believe. But I think the term Operation Warp Speed was probably not the best term, because Warp Speed, from those who watched Star Trek, was sort of speed faster than the speed of light. And that suggested that things were going way too quickly. Mm-hmm. And what we should have done on that part of it said this vaccine really, in 1997, the NIH funded Drew Weissman and Katie Carrico, who eventually won the 2023 Nobel Prize in Medicine for working on mRNA as a vaccine. 1997, 20 years before we ever did this. And then it's when SARS-1 hit in the world. People like Barney Graham and Kizzy Corbett at the NIH were working on an mRNA SARS-1 vaccine, which had it come into this country, that virus, we would have launched that product. So there was a lot of experience. And Operation Warp Speed really was a production issue. It wasn't a research and development issue. That had largely been done. The other thing, and I actually complained about, just one other thing. The other thing that got me, and I tried to make a case of this unsuccessful when I was on the FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee, do we really need to use the term emergency use authorization? These vaccines were 40,000, 30,000. That's the size of any typical pediatric or adult vaccine trial. It just made it sound like things were rushed, that safety guidelines were being, curtailed, etc.
Yeah, which is what's so interesting. Where did that myth even come from? If what you're saying is true, where did the myth that you were always saying the vaccines were rushed and they're unsafe, and that was one of the more common myths that was circulating early on in the pandemic, and why was that? Where did that come from? It sounds like this has been around for a while.
And we should have made that point. I mean, the hero of this pandemic to me was National Institutes of Health.
Mm-hmm.
You remember the National Institutes of Health before it was kind of virtually eliminated by the current administration.
So, Dr. Offit, you're making a really great point. And I get this. We get, I don't know, hundreds of messages a day along the lines of, well, they lied to us. They lied to us. They told us the vaccines would stop us from getting COVID. We still got COVID. Once you lose trust, and this is a point you've made, it's very, very difficult to get it back. And obviously, this is the $1 million question. It's why Unbiased Science exists. We're trying to rebuild that trust. Do you think we can rebuild that trust? Is it possible?
Yes. But again, I'm an optimist. I'm a Philadelphia Eagles season ticket holder. So,
Wow, you really are an optimist.
But I think there was an article in Nature recently that tried to make the point that people haven't lost trust in science per se. What happens is there's just so many other influences out there. So I think the trick is to find those people or groups who are influential and inform them. I'll give you an example. There was you probably know the story, but there was an African-American surgeon at Temple named Ayla Stanford, who took it upon herself to form something called the Black Doctors COVID Consortium because she was really upset that when vaccines were available at Temple, that she's seeing all these Mercedes and Lexuses in the driveway for people who are coming from the suburbs to get it, when they really were designed for North Philadelphia, which is predominantly a Black and brown community. This really upset her. So she, with her own money, created this group of about a couple hundred people, friends of hers, and then went into North Philadelphia, sat into people's living rooms again and again and again, and gave them something they didn't have, which was a doctor who looked like them, who could talk to them. And they trusted her. And she went to people like me and others to try and make sure she had the information right about what the vaccine could or couldn't do. So she was explaining it correctly. And she vaccinated 50,000 people in North Philadelphia. She is an American hero to me. She was a point of light during this pandemic. And I think that's what we have to do. We have to find people who people trust and then try and get them the best information.
Okay. Other thing that you already touched upon is that, warp speed, probably not the best name, right? But steps weren't skipped. It was just our process was a little different. A lot of things happened in tandem versus one after the other, which is usually the process. And then you mentioned how, mRNA technology, we've been studying this technology for decades now, right? Why is it, though, that it worked? We get this question. Why did it work for COVID-19? What was different this time around?
Why does mRNA technology work as a vaccine?
Yes. And specifically for this particular disease, when, we've been testing this for other disease outcomes, right? Other diseases, but it worked for COVID-19. What made it different this time around?
Yeah, I'm not sure I know the answer. I know that when we were leading up to that vaccine, Dr. Fauci had told us he was hopeful the vaccine could be 50% effective against severe disease. And as we got closer, he said he was hoping it could be as much as 75% effective. It really was 90 to 95% effective against severe disease. I think what that technology suffered was that it's a novel technology. I think so in terms of getting people to understand it. The minute you say the word genetic, people think it's going to affect your own genes, even though that's frankly impossible. Also, I think people don't understand you have like a couple 100,000 pieces of mRNA in many of your cells. It's not like we don't have mRNA in our body. But I think that you didn't know. Normally this was a novel technology. Normally for viruses, you give, live attenuated viruses, or you give whole killed viruses, or you give a viral protein, but we'd never given a gene that codes for a protein. That had never happened before. So how was that mRNA going to be processed? Which cells were going to take it up? Where would it travel? And that was all to be known. We had, you had animal model studies, you had phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 studies, but once you vaccinated hundreds of millions of people, then you would know. But I think people are now looking at mRNA as universal flu vaccine, better tuberculosis vaccine, malaria vaccine. We'll see how it works out. But you may be right. It may be that this was unique to this particular pathogen, that it worked so well. Time will tell. I think time will tell, because now it seems like all the money for mRNA technology is drying up. So who knows?
Which is really unfortunate, because it seems like there are some incredible applications potentially to cancer and other things. I know many of us were very excited about those applications. Sarah, were you going to say something?
Oh, no, I was just wondering, like, how do you think that fear played into like this mistrust? Because you mentioned that like people just don't have a fundamental understanding of like what even mRNA is and the fact that we have mRNA in every single one of our cells. And I feel I can't help but think that like maybe this plays into like the overall scientific illiteracy in this country. And I was just wondering, like, what do you think about like the fact that like how do you think that that played into the all of this like kind of mistrust and the myths that are circulating?
Right. So I guess there's Pogo, which was a cartoon from the 1970s. That lovable possum Pogo said it best. I have seen the enemy and they are us. And that's what I think happened here at some level. You had people like Robert Malone testifying in front of Congress. I mean, Robert Malone did important studies on mRNA technology in the late 80s. He was really the first to say mRNA could be used as a vaccine or a protein or as a therapeutic. And he had 2 papers in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, honestly, that were Nobel Prize worthy. And then something happened where he now is testifying in front of Marjorie Greene's committee about how mRNA vaccines cause cancer. And then you get somebody like Joseph Ladapo, who's an MD, PhD from Harvard, who says the same thing. He's sort of asked for all mRNA vaccines not to be used. He was, the Secretary of Surgeon General, rather, at the state of Florida. And so who can you trust? I mean, if you're not specifically trained in this area, and you have people like that saying that, how do you know who to trust? And I think that just sows an enormous amount of distrust. And that's the problem, I think, with getting good information out there. You know this better than me, so you're so good at it, is trying to get above the line, trying to get above the noise that's out there. It's really hard.
And I mean, again, we get this question all the time. Who do we trust? You have these big names, MD, PhDs with fantastic credentials. And then they're sort of lauded as, are they whistleblowers? They've seen the inside, and here, now are they uncovering something? And so it creates this real crisis of confidence. And I struggle. I don't know what to tell people. I don't know why Robert Malone has done a 180 and why he's suddenly saying these things. And I would assume you don't know either, right? Like it's a big question mark for so many of us. Okay, I want to shift gears just a little bit. So we get tons of messages from people who say, well, my doctor or my kid's pediatrician is saying, well, COVID is no worse than the flu. We really don't need to get this vaccine, and because clinicians are not recommending the vaccine, we're not seeing a whole lot of uptake of COVID vaccines right now. What might you say to those people or even to those clinicians who are making those statements? And you're chuckling. I don't know if folks aren't watching our video. Dr. Hoffitt's chuckling right now.
The term just the flus is a contradiction in terms to me. I mean, how many hospitalizations were there this past year from flu? I think over 800,000. Right. I mean, how many deaths? Tens of thousands. Flu somehow has gotten grandfathered in as being okay. I remember as a medical student that one of the residents said to me, I think every medical student should get influenza so they can know what it feels like to really be sick. And that's, I think what happens is flu is sort of used as a catch-all term for any respiratory infection, no matter how mild, whether it's rhinovirus or, just still common colds. And it's not, flu is different. So it is upsetting. I mean, if you hear, for example, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. recently said that he was considering taking the COVID vaccine off the childhood immunization schedule. Why? I mean, virus still circulates. Virus still certainly infects children. We see children now coming into our emergency department now, with COVID. It's a safe vaccine, and studies have shown that it's a safe vaccine in young children. Mm-hmm. And it's an effective vaccine. It's not 100% effective, but it's certainly very effective at preventing severe illness. Why would you take it off the childhood schedule? I mean, I think you can argue who needs a yearly vaccine, which I think reasonably should be targeted to those who are at highest risk. But do you need to be vaccinated? Sure. After 6 months of age, you're not protected anymore for a virus that's circulating that can cause serious illness. Of course, you should keep that vaccine on the schedule. So what's his thinking there? He doesn't explain it. He just says it.
And then one more follow-up question. I'm sorry, Sarah, I will let you talk in just a moment. But like the flu, I mean, now there's this annual update, right, to the COVID vaccines. Can you touch on why that's the case? Some people hear that and they're like, well, why is it we're getting it? Why is there a new one every year? Does that mean it doesn't work? So can we just talk briefly about why that's the case?
No, it's confusing. I mean, I early on, when the bivalent vaccine was offered to our committee to evaluate back in June of 2022, data weren't all that convincing that vaccine was any better than what we already had. And so for that, I wrote a perspective piece for the New England Journal of Medicine called Chasing COVID Variants, a Cautionary Tale. So it's the good news, bad news. I mean, the virus continues to mutate. First of all viruses mutate. It's true. Any virus mutates, but this one continues to mutate away from antibody recognition to some extent. It doesn't mutate away from T-cell recognition. That's good. If that were to happen, if it mutates away from T-cell recognition, and Dan Baruch from Harvard, I think, said it best, T-cells are the unsung hero of this pandemic. And that's true because those regions are conserved. And cytotoxic T-cells are critical in preventing severe disease, not so much mild or moderate disease, but severe disease. And that's the goal, keep you out of the hospital. And that SARS-CoV-2 spike protein to which you're making an antibody response, you're also making a T-cell response. And that's a conserved response. And that's why, even if I think we stayed where we were with just the ancestral strain, the original strain, we probably would still get protection against severe disease. But we're trying to and they talk about this. There's another podcast called the Vincent Racaniello's This Week in Virology.
Yeah.
And they talk about this a little bit, but what this, by continuing to update, you then have a better antibody response against the circulating strain, which will give you 4 to 6 months better protection against mild to moderate disease. There's something to be said for that. But the virus continues to mutate. So by the time that this 3-month production cycle, we make a recommendation in May. The vaccine comes out in June, July, August, September, and then by then that particular strain may have started to decrease, but so there's value in it. It's no worse than what you had before, and a little better. So it's kind of low risk, low reward for a person who's not at high risk to get that vaccine every year.
And isn't what you're describing here, like that's the case with most viruses, right? Like this is not something that's unique to COVID-19, correct?
Well, so although all viruses mutate, they don't necessarily mutate away from the immune response induced by the vaccine. Measles, for example, is also like SARS-CoV-2, a single-stranded RNA virus, yet it doesn't, we've had a measles vaccine since the 1960s. So we had 60 years of a measles vaccine. That virus has never mutated away from recognition by the immune response induced by the vaccine.
And that's why we don't need it every single year. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
It's also the big difference too is measles is a long incubation period disease, meaning from the time when you're exposed to when you develop symptoms. And so for long incubation period disease, all you need is memory. You don't need antibodies in your circulation. And that's why you can eliminate those diseases, because all you need is memory. So long incubation period disease like measles, we eliminated in 2000. Rubella or German measles, we eliminated in 2005. Polio, we eliminated in 1979 from this country. Smallpox, we eliminated from the world by 1980. Those are all long incubation period diseases. But these short incubation period diseases, you're just trying to keep people out of the hospital. I mean, I was fortunate enough to be part of a team at Children's Hospital Philadelphia that created the rotavirus vaccine. And that vaccine has eliminated probably the 70,000 hospitalizations caused every year by that virus. But the virus still circulates in this country and still, causes mild disease. Occasionally we'll see kids come into the emergency department, but we don't see them come into the hospital. So that's the advantage of that vaccine.
Oh yeah, no, I'm glad you're speaking to this because I feel like a lot of people, one of the questions we get often is, why are there some vaccines that we have to get every single year, and why are there some vaccines that we, you just get it once, and then you're good for life essentially. And so it sounds like that has to do with the mutation away from T-cell recognition. Is that correct? As well as the incubation time of the virus itself.
Yeah, were this virus to mutate away from T-cell recognition, we're back to where we were in 2020.
Mm-hmm. Don't put that out. Sorry, don't put that out in the universe. Okay, I want to touch on something controversial, but just because it's all over the news, we don't need to get into depth here. But if you've looked at the White House's new page for COVID, you'll see that they're really doubling down on the lab leak or origin of SARS-CoV-2. So just curious, can you comment, any thoughts on, do we know the origins of this virus? There's the lab leak theory. There's sort of more, natural origins, animal to human. Can you, any thoughts you could share with us?
Was it deliberately engineered?
Yeah, so let me just comment on that particular site, covid.gov. That site was a source of information about COVID, about the vaccine, the disease, masking, testing, quarantine, et cetera. That has now become completely politicized by the current administration to basically try and make the point that so much of what happened in the Biden administration was wrong. And they vilify Dr. Fauci in this, and they show a picture of him looking anguished right next to a certificate given to him by Biden that basically protects him, from lawsuits, et cetera. He's been given a pardon, something he didn't want, by the way. He said it many times. Don't pardon me. I didn't do anything wrong. And he's right. He didn't do anything wrong. He certainly didn't get everything right, but he wasn't trying to get it wrong. And so that's what this is. So right at the top of that page is a picture of Donald Trump looking angry with the lab leak theory is confirmed, and okay. So which upsets me. First of all, this is not a trivial issue. There's been 3 pandemics, coronaviruses in the last 20 years. This isn't the end of it. I mean, these viruses come from bats. Bats have their own unique strains of coronaviruses. The bat population is a large part of the mammalian population. Deforestation is making us live only closer to bats. And so knowing where this virus came from is important because there's going to be another pandemic. So being able to respond quickly, preferably to avoid it, but at least respond more quickly is important. So this matters. And so what do we know about whether or not this was an animal to human spillover event or a lab leak? Here's what you know, and these are published studies. I mean, if there's data on a lab leak, please subject it to peer review. Love to see it. But so you look in Nature, look in Cell, people like Michael Warby and Chris Anderson and Eddie Holmes, these evolutionary biologists who actually have know stuff about this published. They say, so what do you know? You see that the initial cases were right there in the southwestern section of the Hunan wholesale seafood market. Those were the original cases, okay? And then it spreads out concentrically from there. The Wuhan Institute of Virology is roughly 9 miles away on the other side of the Yangtze River. So if it leaked from the lab, why didn't it leak there? Why did it leak right here? So the people who are trying to argue, well, that's because the person who had that virus went to the one place where you would expect an animal to human spillover event to occur, as compared to the other 10,000 places that person could have gone in Wuhan. It was also 2 lineages, by the way. So it had to be 2 people that went right to that one place. Secondly, what the Chinese did a number of things for which they're culpable. One is they sold dozens of animals illegally, mammals illegally in these markets. And that's why they were the source of SARS-1 in China. Also, same thing, raccoon dog. There, they didn't kill the animals. So you had the animals to test way back for 2002, 2003 with SARS-1. You could test the animals and you could see that here's this SARS-CoV-2 SARS-1 that has spread to humans. They killed the animals, so you didn't have that. And the Chinese public health officials were not quick to let people from other countries come in and look what was going on. So they killed all the animals, so you didn't have them to test anymore. But what you did have was you had Chinese scientists did go and swab the area. They swabbed in that particular part of the Hunan wholesale seafood market, carts, brushes, machines used to kill the animals, cages. And what you found SARS-CoV-2 virus, right? Mm-hmm. And then they phylogenetically linked what they found to the early cases because they'd isolated virus from those early cases. It's the same. You could see that it started there and that there were and right next to that, because you lost the animals, you could see mammalian DNA from bamboo rats, palm civets, raccoon dogs. So it's exactly the kind of animals that would be an intermediate host from bats to this now intermediate host to humans. And there were 2 lineages. And then it spread outward. So I think all the data are on that side. I mean, there's never been a pandemic virus created in a laboratory in human history. So if you're going to make that case, if you're going to make an extraordinary claim, as Carl Sagan says, it should be backed by extraordinary evidence, not innuendo and conspiracy. Because by the Chinese, by the way, not letting people in, by them killing all the animals, and they sort of let us open to conspiracy. The other thing that Dr. Fauci said that wasn't exactly right is when he testified in front of Rand Paul asked him the question, did you fund gain of function studies? Well, the answer to that question should have been yes, they did. But so the NIH funded through EcoHealth the Wuhan Institute of Virology's the Shi Jiang Li, who was the sort of principal investigator there. She did gain of function research technically, which is to say she had a strain, this Wuhan Institute of Virology 1 or WIV1 strain, coronavirus, into which she reassorted in separate experiments one of 8 different bat coronaviruses. Now, the WIV1 strain was not pathogenic for humans. When she then made these reassorted viruses, they also weren't pathogenic for humans. So no function was gained. So the right answer to that question, I think, when Rand Paul asked it was, while gain of function research was funded, no function was gained. I mean, I did gain of function research. When we made our rotavirus vaccine, we took bovine rotavirus strains, combined them with human rotavirus strains. So we basically weakened the human rotavirus strains. That's the whole purpose, is to have an attenuated vaccine. And so that was technically gain of function research, but no function was gained. So I wish they would redefine that to make it clear for people that gain of function research is when function is gained that wasn't there before, but we haven't done that.
Well, so it sounds like all of the data is on the side of what you're saying, of this being a virus of natural origin. Then why did this theory become so politically charged? And how do we as scientists handle that?
It's easier to understand. It's nice to be able to blame a person or persons. It's more fun than trying to understand genetic trees emanating from, the southwestern section of that Hunan wholesale seafood market. And China was to blame, but not for the reasons they're saying. And so because they're focusing on something else, this whole lab leak, that they're evil scientists creating dangerous viruses, we're missing the point. Because what we need to do is hold China accountable for these wet markets. And that's the same thing that happened in Foshan, China in 2002, and now it's happened here again. It's going to happen again. And by focusing on lab leak, we're letting them off the hook. The fact that they killed all the animals made it so that we couldn't easily identify that animal source. So we didn't have that raccoon dog, like the end of Crime and Punishment, where like, the Kelnikov or whatever, stands up and says, it was me who killed the old pawnbroker woman and her daughter, Lisbetta. I mean, we didn't have that, except in this case it would be a raccoon dog. But
Okay, so speaking of, I'm going to shift gears slightly. Speaking of looking for simple villains, easy, simple causes of things, right? Slightly tangential, autism. We have to talk about autism. We can't have Dr. Paul Offit on the pod and not talk about the vaccines cause autism myth. I'm sure we've all heard that, there's a claim out there, we're going to find the cause of autism by September. Dr. Offit is shaking his head. I have had numerous meltdowns over this. How would you, first, what do you say to people who are concerned that vaccines cause autism? And maybe we could just talk a little bit of our understanding of what does increase the risk of autism and why we could not possibly, quote, find the cause of autism by September.
Yeah, there's a certain hubris to RFK Jr., right? I mean, he sort of steps forward and says he's going to now have money. He's going to fund various research groups, and he will, by September, have some early indication as to what is the cause or causes of autism. But he gave you hints. He said that autism is preventable and that it's an exposure. And here's a man who's been saying vaccines cause autism for the last 20 years. So why don't we assume he is about to shoehorn data into this fixed, immutable, science-resistant hypothesis, and that's why Unbiased Science, when he starts to put out those studies, is going to be the group that's going to get out there first. Hey, look, this is wrong.
You better believe it. Sorry.
You heard it here first, folks.
So it's not, I mean, starting in like 2010, the U.S. has given at least $150 million a year, up to more recently $330 or $360 million a year. And there's the Autism Cares Act, which is another $2 billion over the next 5 years. So it's not like people haven't studied autism, and he's just going to come in with this where he's already decided what it is and fit his data into that. But, so what do you know? You know that there's at least a genetic component, and it's not one gene, like sickle cell disease or cystic fibrosis, it's many genes, but they're generally developmental genes expressed early in pregnancy or in utero when with synaptic development and stuff. So how one's brain cell communicates with another. That maternal and paternal age both are associated with an increased risk of autism. That certain pregnancy maternal health factors matter, like obesity, diabetes, psychiatric disorders. So that's all true, and all of which sort of falls under the category, and also infections like rubella, cytomegalovirus. So that's all determined before you're born. But he offers something which I think is a false hope, which is that I'm going to find a definite environmental exposure that causes autism, and we're going to eliminate it, and then we're going to eliminate autism or prevent autism, which is just wrong. And I think it's unfair to people who have children with autism. And, children with autism are generally under-vaccinated. Their healthy siblings are generally under-vaccinated. So what have we done with all this? All we've done is increase the risk of vaccine-preventable disease without any way decreasing the risk of autism. So it's been hard to
And we're seeing all that play out now, of course, with measles. We're seeing a reduction in MMR uptake, which is just completely devastating. And this vilification of autism. I mean, if I are, a family of a child with autism, I'm livid right now. It's become this boogeyman, and they're making it seem like the diseases that the vaccines prevent are, less of a concern than autism. I mean, it's absolutely beyond offensive.
Well, and then also, as a neuroscientist, I can say that I have so many colleagues that are tirelessly working on identifying this question, and it's have been for decades and decades. And what do you think we've been doing in the neuroscience community so far? Have we just been sitting on our hands being well, I don't know, it's too much. It's not worth investigating, that we can just be all right, well, now we're really going to put our nose to the grindstone and we're going to figure it out by September. These deadlines are insane.
See, I think what he's doing is by catastrophizing autism, by getting up there and saying they'll never find love. Which means he never saw love on the spectrum. Which was
just going to say that.
They'll never write a poem. They'll never pay taxes. Thus confusing. There was actually a Comedy Central thing that this. He said they'll never pay taxes. He says he's confusing them with art history majors.
That's hysterical.
So why does he do that? Why does he catastrophize it? Because he's making it's so horrible that we're going to have to do something really radical to change that, like eliminating vaccines. Because I think by making this such a horrible thing, that paves the way for him to do what he wants to do, which is to make vaccines less available, less affordable, and more feared. I think that's where he's heading in all this. And I think that's why he did that. He got a lot of pushback from the autism community by catastrophizing it the way he did, deservedly.
Okay, one more thing. I have a question, then I will turn it over to you, Sarah, is what do you say to people who, vaccines, it's just a pharma for-profit machine, physicians get paid to push vaccines. What say you?
Well, first of all, yes, pharmaceutical companies are a for-profit industry. I think if you took the profit out of it, you wouldn't have medical products. So we do need medical products. I think it's reasonable to say, isn't it true that pharmaceutical companies have acted aggressively or unethically or illegally? Yes. I think the opioid epidemic is a terrible example of how the pharmaceutical company, frankly, captured regulators to ultimately, kill people with the opioid epidemic by claiming that it wasn't addictive, that drugs like oxycodone weren't addictive. It was wrong. And so there are books written on this, and they are compelling. That doesn't mean that everything the pharmaceutical industry does is wrong. I mean, and the vaccines generally are not big money makers because they're not something you give every day. They're never going to compete with lipid lowering agents or neurological drugs or psychiatric drugs. So that's why you can eliminate vaccines. You can. These companies will drop vaccines in a second. It's less than 10% of what they do. Do what RFK Jr. wants to do. Take them out of the vaccine injury compensation program, or make autism a compensable injury in the vaccine injury compensation program. And you'll be right back to where you were in the 1980s, early 80s, before you had the vaccine injury compensation program, when we went from 18 companies in 1980 to 4 by the end of the decade. It's less than 10% of what these companies do. They're not just vaccine makers. They make drugs. So the drugs are much bigger for them than vaccines. So they can abandon it, and that was just, I'm sure, going to be fine with RFK Jr. But I think so. What do you do? I mean, I worked with one. I was never paid by a pharmaceutical company, despite what you may read on the internet. My funding always came from National Institutes of Health. But I did watch how Merck made that vaccine. And what I saw was a lot of dedicated people trying to get it right. People who thought they now could work at a place that's the only place, which is, say, pharmaceutical companies that have the resources and expertise to make a vaccine. I mean, it's $1 billion to $1.5 billion to make a vaccine. The government's not going to do that because, frankly, they could never meet government regulations on how to do it. But I mean, so I look at somebody like Penny Heaton, who is an MD. She after she finished her pediatric training, she went to Kenya as part of the Epidemic Intelligence Service, and then she saw children die of rotavirus. So then she came to Merck because she thought, okay, I would like to head their program to make a rotavirus vaccine, which was a huge program. And that phase 3 trial was a prospective, placebo-controlled, 72,000 infant, 11 country, 4-year, probably $350 million trial, that one phase 3 trial. And this is just an image I'll never forget and that no one ever has of a pharmaceutical company. She stood up in front of Merck Upper Gwynedd, in front of like 200 people at Merck. And she's explaining now they've just broken the code on the phase 3 trial. Worked, safe, good. And she said, she showed a series of slides. And she showed one slide, map of the world, and there's all these little black dots that are studying Africa, Asia, Latin America, representing 1,000 deaths for that each dot. She said, now we have in hand the technology to prevent this. Then she shows the next slide, in which all the dots are gone. And then she, in front of 200 people, she puts her head down and weeps, shoulders shaking, weeps. That is not an image anyone has of a pharmaceutical company. But when people will say, well, the pharmaceutical companies, want to do this, but the parents want this. People in pharmaceutical companies are parents. Mm-hmm. The doctors want this, but the doctors are parents. I mean, I just think we need to humanize this at some level, which is not to say that there aren't there aren't things that are done by the pharmaceutical companies that are to be held, where they need to be held accountable for their actions. I agree with that, but it doesn't mean everything they do is wrong. But they've lost trust. The term big pharma is a pejorative term, and I don't say try and telling you that story about Penny Heaton. It's just nobody ever stands up for the pharmaceutical industry.
And what about pediatricians? What about this idea that doctors are getting paid or there's this big push to vaccinate for profit? Yeah. So,
but they don't. But from this parent standpoint, they see the reps come in, or they see a lunch being given, and they think that those reps are buying, the pediatrician's faith in vaccines, whereas you shouldn't have faith in vaccines. But you actually don't have to trust pharmaceutical companies. I mean, when a vaccine is licensed and recommended, there are systems in place like the Vaccine Safety Data Link will very quickly pick up a problem if it happens. I mean, look at COVID vaccine. I mean, within weeks, you knew that the mRNA vaccines were a rare cause of myocarditis. Within weeks, you know that J&J's vaccine was a very rare cause of clotting because there's no hiding. If you want to lie to the FDA, by the way, which will kill you in the future as a pharmaceutical company, if you're trying to omit data or misrepresent data, it is going to be found out post-licensure. So it's not worth it.
Sarah, woof.
I'm like, wow, I mean, if that doesn't say everything right there, I don't know what does.
Right.
I just want to ask just a quick point, as long as we're talking about pediatricians and everything like that. I think one point that people, especially parents that are vaccine skeptical, bring up a lot and will bring to us as questions at Unbiased is like the concept of natural immunity being better than vaccination. And so why is this why do you think that this is such a persistent talking point? And like, where's the nuance? Because obviously, natural immunity is important, right? Like we got to have some sort of a functioning immune system, but where's the nuance there?
Yeah, first of all, I think parents should be skeptical about vaccines. They should be skeptical about anything they put into their child's body. And really taking a step back, we ask a lot of parents in this country. We do. We ask them to, in the first few years of life, to prevent 14 different diseases, which can mean as many as 25 inoculations during that time. It can mean as many as 5 shots at one time to prevent diseases that most people don't see, using biological fluids that most people don't understand. I think it would be amazing. It's amazing to me when people don't have questions about vaccines, given that.
Good point.
I think that in terms of by the way, I'd like to know who Mother Nature's public relations team is, because she has been trying to kill it. But so I'm a child of the 50s. I had measles. I had natural measles. Fortunately, I wasn't one of those 50,000 children who would get hospitalized and 500 who would die every year. So I prefer the term actually survivor-induced immunity than natural immunity. But and my children are children in the 90s, and they're like you, right? Aren't you like children in the 90s?
80s, baby.
90s.
So I have an immune response. I probably have a greater immune response, a higher antibody response, probably higher frequency of memory B and T cells than they have, but they have enough. Meaning we're able to eliminate measles with a vaccine. Therefore, they have enough immunity, which is really what matters. I think, sure, natural immunity generally is better than vaccination. The problem is the price paid for natural immunity. Mm-hmm. I mean, the goal is to induce an immune response very similar to that induced by natural infection without paying the price of natural infection. That's what vaccines are.
Speaking of PR, it's so funny. We have a brilliant immunologist in our team, Dr. Amy Pugh-Bernard. She hates the term natural immunity, and she's like trying to get us to move away from that because, there's this appeal to nature. Everyone loves natural everything. It just seems better. It seems safer. But as you just said, Dr. Abbott, I mean, there's a price to be paid. There are so many other dangerous potential, effects of these, if the viruses run rampant in our bodies, right? So vaccine-induced immunity is safer from that perspective. What did you call it? You said survivor.
Survivor immunity, right?
Oh, I'm going to use that's our new term.
That's better. Yeah.
Okay. So just wrapping up here, do you just any final thoughts? It just seems like such a pivotal time for health, for science. Is there anything that you wish people knew? You have such an interesting perspective as a clinician sitting on the vaccine committees. Is there any, as a parent, as a human, all these different perspectives, is there anything that you wish people knew or anything that you want to put out there?
I think it's a dangerous time for America's children. I do. I think that with the sort of decreased surveillance and by the CDC of the current measles outbreak, look on their website. You get very little information from the CDC about exactly what's going on out there. And I have people who are on the ground telling me this is much worse than that 3 people have died already, which is a massive epidemic. It has to be. The death rate is only about 1 in 1,000 for me, but about 1 in 1,000 for me. So that in combination with the fact that you, for example, take away the money for clinics in Dallas to go to high risk areas and vaccinate. So on the one hand, I think that the current administration, and I think through its leader, Secretary of Health and Human Services, has turned its back on infectious diseases. And that's what RFK Jr. said. Quote, I want to give infectious diseases a break for a while. That's what he said when he was running for president, because we need to focus on chronic disease. First of all, you can do both things. But I think that, so he's had 2 press conferences. One, he talks about autism. One, he talks about red dye. Where's the press conference on measles or pertussis? We've had 4 times more pertussis than we had last year, and we had 6 times more pertussis last year than we had the year before. This is what happens when you have an erosion in faith in vaccines. And I just feel like I wish I could stand on the mountaintops and say, there's so much in medicine we don't know. There's so much medicine we can't do. This we know. This we can do. Those 2 little girls that died in Texas, a 6-year-old, 8-year-old, perfectly healthy girls, is unconscionable. We can't just grandfather that in as okay, which is what RFK Jr. did. He stood at a White House meeting. He said, if you look at the World Health Organization's Eastern European region, which includes about 56 countries, they have 127,000 cases of measles and 36 deaths. We are the envy of the world. What is he talking about? First of all, why don't you compare us to like France and Germany instead of like Romania and Kazakhstan? This is a little more reasonable. But and so that's what he's doing. He's just trying to let it all slip under the rug there. And because, as he says in his book, he doesn't believe in the germ theory. That's what he says in his book. He doesn't believe in the germ. I don't know if there's criteria for being head of HHS. I'd like to think that's one. Yeah, look on the real Anthony Fauci, pages 285 to 288. He does not believe that specific germs cause specific diseases. He doesn't. He believes in the miasma theory, which is to say that you just have to have a high level of nutrition and you won't get these sort of infections. And that's why he's always talking about vitamin A. And that's when those 2 girls died, he said they must be malnourished. It all makes sense, actually. And I know it's so unbelievable that I think no one could buy that he actually doesn't believe in germs. So I said HIV doesn't cause AIDS. That's why when there was an outbreak in Samoa, that killed 83 people, mostly children less than 4. He said it was a defective measles vaccine that caused that outbreak, which wasn't true. If you look at the 1918 flu pandemic, he says, well, that was a defective flu vaccine that caused that pandemic. We didn't have a flu vaccine until the 1940s. But that virus has been isolated in the permafrost. It was flu virus, right? So he's just that off. And it's like you're watching this happen from a distance and you just want to scream.
Well, yeah, thank you for capturing.
At a happy note, here's what happens when you ask old people to come on your show. They're groomed.
No, honestly, we have to hear that. And thank you. Honestly, I mean, this is just having Dr. Offit on the podcast. I have to say this. This is a moment I will remember for the rest of my life. I mean, really, Dr. Offit, we cannot thank you enough. We collectively, for all the work that you've done and continue to do. And you're such an inspiration. I'm going to get emotional. I mean, really, just thank you so much for shouting it from the rooftops and for everything you've done to keep us healthy. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, thank you for what you've done. I mean, thank you for standing up for science in a compelling, compassionate, easy to understand way. Thank you. You helped me. And when I looked at your the sort of 24 studies of MMR showing that it doesn't cause autism, that's really helpful.
Oh my
thank
gosh.
you.
And Dr. Offit, where can our listeners hear more from you?
Well, I have a Substack that comes out periodically. I do podcasts, and then with Vincent Racaniello, we do this kind of beyond the noise video version of those Substacks. So I'm trying to get information, trying to get above the noise. Actually, what's called beyond the noise, that particular Substack. But it's like, which is interesting. The Substacks are interesting. They're like the new journalism.
It is.
Oh, we love our Substack here at Unbiased.
And we will, of course, link to Dr. Offit's Substack.
Mm-hmm.
We're followers. We recommend it. I mean, it's like the Bible. For those who... Anyway, we're not going to touch that. Thank you so much again. Sarah, do you want to take us home?
Thanks, Dr. Offit, and thank you all for tuning in. We hope you learned a thing or two. I certainly did. Please join us next week on your trusted source for no nonsense, just science.